Washington University and her MD from State University of New York at Stony Brook. She's an academic faculty member with expertise in primary care, preventive services, and health policy, and has lectured at national and regional venues, including medical societies, health plans, health departments, professional organizations, and government conferences. In the middle of her career, Dr. Sarfaty worked as a senior health policy advisor for the U.S. Senate Health Committee for 7 years, where she planned hearings, wrote legislation, negotiated policy, and met with constituents. In 2016, she founded and is the executive director of the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health, based within the George Mason University Center for Climate Change Communication. This was accomplished after several years of collaboration with medical societies to assess physicians' experiences with health effects of climate change and their attitudes and interests in engaging the problem. Dr. Sarfaty is the author of widely circulated guides and publications, including many peer review articles and 2 book chapters on climate change and health. She travels widely organizing, empowering, and amplifying the voice. The Bowen Center website for further details and registration. It should be a most stimulating 2 days. Tonight, Dr. Sarfaty will talk about a physician's response to climate change. Let's welcome Dr. Sarfaty.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the introduction, and thanks very much for the invitation to speak this evening. This is a subject that has become very pressing, is much more in the news, especially over the last year. And so every opportunity to speak about it is really valuable. And so I want to start by just giving you my disclosures. So I have no financial disclosures to make, but I do have some personal ones. And so this is some members of the new generation that are coming along in our family. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the way public thinks about climate change, and then how health professionals can make a contribution to addressing climate change, and give different types of evidence that climate change exists and is happening, and list 4 ways that climate change is affecting our health, and then explain how physicians are currently responding to climate change. So I don't think that you are connected up and can take this quiz while you sit here, but this is a Yale University quiz that is 4 questions and allows you to figure out where you are in the spectrum of public opinion. But I can just ask you, and we may get the same results, but you can go to this quiz later if you'd like to. And so how many of you think you're alarmed about climate change? Okay, this is largely an alarmed group. Okay, the next category is concerned, and then after that, you're concerned. Okay, all right, and then there's cautious, and then disengaged, and doubtful, and dismissive. And so our program is at the Center for Climate Change Communication at George Mason. And they have partnered with Yale University for the last 10 years. Twice a year, every year since 2008, they've done a representative sample of Americans in a survey to figure out how Americans think about climate change. And they've been following how public opinion has been shifting during this period of time. And you can see right now that about 29% of the people are considered alarmed, 30% are considered concerned, 17% are cautious, about 5% are disengaged, 9% are doubtful, and 9% dismissive. And as you move from the alarmed to the dismissive, you move along a trajectory of engagement involvement and likelihood to take any kind of action. So an alarmed person is somewhat more likely to act than a concerned. A concerned is certainly more likely to act than a cautious, and so on. The disengaged population is largely people who are so involved in day-to-day problems of living that they may not be paying so much attention. And then over on the right side, you have the doubtful and the dismissive, and they are just exactly what those terms describe. And this is how they have segmented the population after doing all of this research. And what they find is that as people learn more, they move toward the alarmed category. And so the cautious tell you that climate change is happening. They know that climate change is happening, but they don't know that much about it. And what I want to tell you is that over time, we have moved toward the alarmed and concerned. And the size of that cautious group has gone from about 25% down to 17%. So there's actually been quite a bit of progress in people's thinking. And if we could get that cautious, more knowledgeable, and move them into the alarmed and the concerned, then we would really have, an overwhelming sense of public opinion. So how can we potentially influence that cautious group? Well, the two areas of information that have been shown to be most influential are the way that climate change affects our health and also the extent to which climate change endangers the next generation, endangers our ability to pass on a healthful living place to our children and to our grandchildren. So what I want to share also is that only about half of Americans think that people are being harmed right now in the United States by global warming. So you can see that's 48%, and you see over time, starting back in 2008, that there were only a third of the people who at that point thought that there were folks that were being harmed, and now we're closer to a half. So we have gone up quite a bit, but we still have, half the people who don't think that others are being harmed right now because of climate change. And so again, this goes back to the fact that climate change is impacting health. And who better to be able to talk about that than health professionals, clinicians, and to let people know that climate change is impacting health. And that does have an effect on people's opinion and whether they think that people are being harmed or not. So my organization is called the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health. And our mission is to inform the public and policymakers about the health harms of climate change and the health benefits of climate solutions, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and taking other preventive and protective measures. And the imagery of our group is very reflective of the imagery that we tend to use. And so, you can see here's a child being taken care of by a health professional. This is another example of that imagery. This was the cover of a report that we put out in 2017 called Medical Alert: Climate Change is Harming Our Health. And, it's a young football player who looks overheated, sitting, drinking water. And, the message here is climate change is not about, it's rather than about glaciers or polar bears, climate change is about, our children. So our organization at this point has 25 medical society members, and together they represent over 60% of all the physicians in the United States. So it's over 600,000. And there are 33 affiliates that represent various public health organizations and other clinician organizations. And together they represent about some millions of public health professionals. Key messages from the report are, one, that climate change is already causing health problems in communities in every region of the country. And based on the work that we've done in surveying physicians, the physicians are seeing this, they agree, and they're seeing this in their own practices. And the health of any American can be harmed by climate change, but some face much greater risk. And the group that faces greater risk include children who spend more time outside, pregnant women, who it turns out are more sensitive to heat and dehydration and poor air quality and who are more likely to deliver prematurely in those circumstances. Students, especially those who are playing sports outside. Elder people especially those who may not have air conditioning or who may not realize when they're getting very thirsty and somewhat dehydrated, and people with chronic illnesses and allergies, and also people with limited resources who can't get out of harm's way when storms threatened. So the origin of the health impacts are probably not a big surprise to a group like folks like you, but it includes heat, it includes torrential rains and the floods that go along with them, and the storms, very threatening storms. It includes droughts and the fires that are more likely to occur in the face of a drought, threats to mental health, threats to nutrition and food security, especially as the heat and the other circumstances wipe out crops, or the droughts make it difficult to grow food, vector-borne diseases, and all of these are likely to get worse unless we act. And the thing is that we do know what we need to do. We know what actions are needed. So I want to just share with you a few stories. That report, Medical Alert, the cover of which you saw there just a minute ago with the young football player, has 4 physician stories in it. And this is one of them. This is a story of Dr. Samantha Adoud, who's a Virginia pediatrician, whose son was at band camp playing the clarinet when he was 11. And he collapsed. And the parents were called to the hospital. And it turned out that he had experienced heat illness. Well, for her, this was a wake-up call, because she realized that summers were not like what she remembered when she was growing up. Summer was something quite different and really had been severe enough to endanger her son's life. And ever since, she's been extremely involved with us and leading a Virginia-based group that's part of our organization. And this is her story. You can hear her tell her own story. It takes about a minute and a half, and it's on our website. And then we've got the story of Dr. Claude Tellez, who is a critical care doc in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, who was there in August of 2016 when there were torrential rains that caused flooding, and 30,000 people were evacuated, and 10,000 people ended up in shelters. He talks about what it was like 6 months later, where you saw appliances, refrigerators, housing parts, air conditioners, you name it, all piled up on the sides of the roads by curbsides because they still hadn't been picked up. And this was 6 months later. And he was told by the teachers in the school that many of the children became very upset every time it rained because they were afraid that it was going to flood again. And so this had already become, a somewhat traumatic experience for those children. Of course, many people reported stress, depression, anxiety in the weeks and months that followed. So mental health impacts are a huge piece of the consequences of climate change. And there's been, writings about increase in substance abuse in addition to depression and anxiety and some of these other problems that we've talked about, domestic abuse as well. So this is the trends. This shows the trends in heavy precipitation since 1900. And you can see that certainly since 1950, there's been this continuous stepwise increase in the number of severe rain events. These are only the events that are greater than like the 99th percentile. And so those heavy-duty torrential rains have been steadily increasing. And when it rains, it often floods, and then in many places in the country, that means that there are sewer overflows, and some of the nutrients find their way into the waterways, and then they go downstream, and they end up in the Great Lakes and the rivers, and it causes algae blooms, and can also contaminate crops if there's backflow of the sewage and so forth. So it causes multiple problems. And then, of course, the dry seasons are getting drier as it gets hotter and the ground dries out more quickly. And this leads to drought and food shortages and water shortages and wildfires. And with the wildfires comes real deterioration in air quality. And so this is a story of one of the doctors who dealt with a fire in his home state of North Carolina back in 2008. It was a drought year, and they had a terrible fire, and there was a huge smoke plume that billowed across the state. And he was working in the emergency room. He's an emergency room physician. And he thought he was seeing a lot more respiratory and cardiac problems. And so he and some colleagues decided that they were going to compare the counties that got a lot of the smoke plume to those counties that didn't get smoke plume. And they found some pretty striking differences. So this shows you, a map, two maps, one drawn and the other one, like a satellite map of where the smoke plume went. And so they were able to compare those counties that did and didn't get the smoke plume. And the ones that did had an increase, a 50% increase in respiratory conditions of all types. So not just bronchitis and asthma presentations, but pneumonias and bronchitis. And it also had, they also had an increase in presentations of heart conditions, including heart attacks and heart failure. So this kind of leads into one of the other health impacts, which is air pollution. And you've got the air pollution that comes with these fires. And again, the smoke can travel not just across the state of North Carolina, but literally hundreds of miles. The smoke often will travel hundreds of miles. And when they look at the diagnoses of people admitted to emergency rooms hundreds of miles away, they can see an uptick in those same conditions that he was seeing. And then also, because of the warmer weather, you have a spread of plants that cause allergic reactions. And so the pollen season is more severe, it's longer, more of the year when it's suitable for plant growth. Some of the plants that only grew in one place now grow in other places. And so you have pollen particles in addition to these other small fire particles, the particulates from the fire smoke. Together, this means much more polluted air during a period of greatly, warmer weather. And there's another factor, too, which is that when it's very hot and the sun is shining, those two elements together, the sunlight and the heat, act on any fumes that are in the air, any hydrocarbons in the air, and form ozone. So you have increased particulates for all these reasons, and you have more ozone, and those are the two main things that make up air pollution in general. And so you do get, rising air pollution as a result of climate change. And this map shows you the lengthening in pollen season. So this was until 2005, and the pollen season is even longer now. But you can see by latitude how pollen season is longer all the way across the United States, and it's lengthened the most in the more northern latitudes. Many of you may have heard that the change in temperature is actually greater up in Alaska than it is where we live. And so the poles have actually had a greater change in temperature than more temperate regions. Okay, then we have the spread of diseases that are caused by ticks and mosquitoes. And as a colleague of mine likes to say, it may be that the most serious aspect of climate change is going to be the smallest, meaning like the mosquito. So we have heard a lot about the conditions that are carried by mosquitoes, which are being potentiated by climate change, and also that there's more of the country which is now suitable for growth of certain mosquitoes like albopictus and the Aedes aegypti. And so there have been outbreaks of mosquito-borne diseases, and of course great increases in Lyme disease and other tick-borne diseases. And this is a story of Nitin Damle, who's an internist who practices in Rhode Island, who used to see 2 to 3 patients a month in his practice who had Lyme disease. And that was the experience of his colleagues in that practice as well. And now he sees more like 15 to 20 a month, and the same thing for his colleagues. And so, from their perspective, they realized that something very different was going on just by virtue of who was coming in the door and what the problems were. And he's now one of the most vigorous speakers on climate change. He was a former president of the American College of Physicians, and he's probably given 40 talks around the country in the last couple of years. Okay, so I'm going to take a quick break here. It's about 20 minutes into the talk, and just find out right at this point if there's any questions about things, and just give you a chance to clear your minds for a minute.
Well, I understand, the direction of the the talk and the interest in climate change is hitting individuals. But I think for us at the Bowen Center, we're really interested in families. And I would say that, every time an individual in a family is impacted, it impacts the family as a whole. And I think part of our interest is in talking about families, that, families are displaced by floods and fires and hurricanes. And so it's not just the health, it's the capacity of the family to operate effectively. If a pregnant woman miscarries, that has an impact on the whole family. So I understand where you're coming from, but I think we're trying to sort of broaden the conversation about, the impact on the effectiveness of families. But all these things have an impact on the effectiveness.
No, absolutely. And in fact, I wonder whether, any of you have ideas to share about that, like how is it likely to impact the family unit? I have a little bits of information here and there. We have two psychiatry groups that are part of our organization, and the American Psychological Association is one of the affiliates. So we have 33 affiliates and they're one. And the two psychiatry groups, so the American Psychiatric Association or Psychiatry Association and the American Association of Community Psychiatrists. And they are doing, they have formed the Climate Psychiatry Alliance, they call it, and are focusing, very heavily on what the impacts are on people, on people's emotional life and their well-being from that perspective. Obviously, the Bowen Center has a kind of, unique focus or a particular focus within that, which is really the family unit. And I can't tell you if there have been writings about that yet. If there haven't been, though, I would encourage you to write something about it because, now is just a great time to get these kinds of concerns out into the literature. At one of the meetings of the, I think it was the APA, they had like 13 educational sessions on climate change last year. And so we had, at our annual meeting, the different organizations, different societies made presentations about what they were doing, and so the allergists had like their annual meeting focused on environment, the environmental impacts on health, including climate change. And the family physicians have added some web pages and, have included a CME session in their annual meeting for the first time, which had just happened. They're doing an update in their journal. And so the Psychiatry Alliance presented and said they had 13 sessions at one of their, at their most recent annual meeting focused on climate change impacts, mental health impacts. And so I've been hearing them over time, and they have done a lot of thinking about all of this, and they've been trying to put out, there's a newsletter. So there's a newsletter writings, and then there are also some more serious writings. And I think every one of those is reaching a lot of other mental health professionals in ways that are very helpful and stimulating thinking about this. At our annual meeting 2 years ago, we had a psychiatrist who was from Puerto Rico, but now lives in Miami, who's been going back to Puerto Rico since Maria. And, she talked about how her work was focused on building resilience in these communities that were more remote and where they were likely to continue to experience problems like this, but where, resilience really could be encouraged based on, the sort of the glue, the social capital within those villages. So she presented on that. It was very interesting. A pediatrician who works with us, informed us that it took 6 months after Hurricane Katrina to reunite all the children with their parents. 6 months. We were just stunned when we learned that. The kids being separated from their parents for 6 months because of Hurricane Katrina. And so, I'm sure that's, the impacts are tremendous. And I think there's really, a contribution to be made there. I'd encourage you all to, to talk about it. If there are folks who have experienced this directly, who would like, who could write about it or just even to speculate about it, to call for, for people to share experiences about that, I think it'd be valuable. Yeah.
This, maybe you can answer it better after this part of the presentation, but I've heard in the last couple of weeks that scientists who are measuring the data on climate change in the Arctic and whatever are so upset that they go through depression, that they even break out in tears during presentations because already so much has happened to the Earth because we're a stupid species.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and a lot of, well, I can tell you that.
I mean, not just MDs, I mean, these are,
Absolutely, and there's
PhDs
a
sorts.
diagnosis, solastalgia, which is it's about that sense of loss that one feels from the relation to the Earth, and I know that some of the exchange between some of the folks in the therapy community were about the fact that really should be adopted into the diagnostic categories, because they think that it's striking, and that there are a lot of people who are experiencing that, and not just doctors and not just climate scientists, but there's a lot of people all over the country who are experiencing that. And in fact, I was speaking.
These are they're actively measuring their U.S. Geological Survey or universities or whatever.
Yeah, no, I mean, the people who are most knowledgeable you would expect to be most upset, and disturbed. But I guess I'm telling you that even people who maybe are not that knowledgeable, are perceiving, look at the kids. Look at Greta Thunberg. I mean, she's devastated. And there's all these other children who feel devastated because they realize what's happening,
Hi. We have a question from Facebook.
Sure.
Lance Simpkins asks, how as clinicians do we best separate the evidence from the belief system? And from a systems point of view, what part does anxiety play in the emotional system surrounding the discussions of climate change?
Wow, well, that's a really interesting question, and I'm not sure I am the best person to address that. But actually, maybe it would help if I moved into the climate science piece first, and then we could come back to that. Okay, because I think it does, your understanding of the climate science plays a role. And, when you talk about beliefs, talk about facts. So, let's move into the facts. Okay, so, everybody probably remembers or may remember from their science and, elementary school or middle school that nitrogen accounts for most of the Earth's atmosphere and oxygen is about a little over 20%, 21%, and then we have these other small, components of our atmosphere. So argon is 0.9%, and then the other components are even less, and that includes carbon dioxide, nitrous oxides, methane, and ozone, and water vapor, and these are all trace gases that are part of our atmosphere. Well, interestingly, the light of the sun alone is not enough to bring up the temperature of the Earth to the point where it's livable. So without the atmosphere, our average temperature would be so low on the Earth that it would be unlivable. It'd be in the many minus degrees. It's like minus 18 centigrade or something. Very cold and really not livable. It wouldn't be a livable planet without an atmosphere. So what is it about the atmosphere that allows our planet to be warmer? Well, nitrogen and oxygen do not absorb and then re-radiate heat. They are unable to absorb and re-radiate heat. That's not part of their properties. They just don't do that. The gases that absorb and then re-radiate heat are carbon dioxide, nitrous oxides, methane, and water vapor. So those are essential for making our planet warm. But they're very tiny amounts. And if the amount increases, then they absorb more heat and they re-radiate more heat. So that's the basic mechanism. You've got these gases that absorb heat and re-radiate it. And this is something that has been known for a very long time. So back in 1824, Joseph Fourier was testing the properties of gases. He's known for testing the properties of all kinds of gases. And he basically discovered what I just said, that oxygen and nitrogen don't absorb heat and don't re-radiate heat. But these other gases do. And then, in 1859, another scientist, John Tyndall, confirmed that these gases, and they talked about them trapping the heat, which means is that, they absorb the heat and then they re-radiate it. So it doesn't just like get to the Earth's surface and bounce off. They're essentially re-radiating it, and that warms up our environment. This is more than 150 years ago that this was understood. Just to get a handle here on how some of these gases have changed over time. So you've all heard about the ice cores, and you can go way back in history, and by analyzing the trapped air from inside the ice that hasn't been taken out of Antarctica for 1,000 years, they could see exactly what the composition of the air was at that time. And what they find is that you can see carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide. They were all at that low level. It looks like somewhere between 250 and 275 until about the 1800s. And since that time, the percentage of the amount of the atmosphere that's accounted for by these gases has increased dramatically. There's a lot more of these gases in the atmosphere. And this is another way of showing that same information. And so on the left side of this graph is global temperature, and on the right side is the concentration of carbon dioxide. And this goes from 1880 up to close to the present. And you can see that the blue there, the global temperatures were down under 57 degrees. And that yellow dot shows what the carbon dioxide concentration was in 1958. They decided they were always going to measure the carbon dioxide concentration in the same place on the Earth. So the scientists picked Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii, on the top of that mountain, and that's always where they measure it now. And back in 1958, it was 318. That was the concentration of carbon dioxide. Now it's, I think, 412, I heard the last one was. Now it's 412. And so as that concentration has gone up from 318 to 340, 360, 380, 400, the temperature has risen. So this is, going back again to carbon dioxide is able to absorb the sun's energy and re-radiate it. Absorb the sun's energy and re-radiate it. And as the amount of that has increased in the atmosphere, the temperature is higher, is going up, and it's still going up. Yeah,
is the CO2 concentration fairly uniform worldwide, or is it maybe a different number in the Arctic or the Antarctic?
That's a very good question. That is a very good question. There are little variations in the CO2 concentration.
Yeah.
And there's a botanist who used to work right in this area, Louis Ziska, who studied this very heavily. And he measured carbon dioxide all over the place, cities, or rural areas. And he wanted to see what impact it had on growing plants. And so he discovered, there are differences. It's not exactly the same in the middle of Washington, D.C. as it would be out somewhere in the countryside. So what we get
in
are
the middle of the ocean somewhere.
Yeah, so what we get are average numbers. So those numbers are always average numbers.
Well,
I mean, that we're told they're average numbers. And I have a colleague who he has this little carbon dioxide measurement device, and he loves to take it into the meeting room and to tell everybody, the concentration of carbon dioxide in this room is now 550. So if you're feeling sleepy, there's good reason for that.
Does he leave the room then?
No, he doesn't, no. And actually, there's been some work on test environments showing that the carbon dioxide concentration in the testing room does impact student scores. You don't function as well when the carbon dioxide is higher. Okay, so now we know we have over 400 parts per million, and when did all that get put in there? And so because of carbon-14 dating, carbon changes into over time. The most elements will change a little bit, and then you've got different isotopes. So they're able to figure out when the carbon actually went into the atmosphere, and they can see that about half of the carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere has actually gone in there over the last 40 years or so.
And that's from radio date, the carbon,
Yes, yeah, exactly.
carbon isotope radio.
Yeah. So the other thing is that, the scientists with all the satellites and all, they have an incredibly detailed record at this point of how much coal, oil, and natural gas are burned every year, how much carbon dioxide is absorbed by the oceans and the surface of the Earth. And they show that, about 45% of the carbon dioxide that's emitted because of human activity remains in the atmosphere. In any case, so, there's all these multiple lines of evidence that show quite clearly what the scientists have been telling us, that, the Earth is warmer and that it's attributable to the greater amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which has come because of human activity. And so all of these lines of evidence together are mutually reinforcing. And it's not speculative. This is really what's happening. So there's really not any debate about that. There can be plenty of debate about how to address it, what we do about it. But the fact that it's happening is really not a matter of debate anymore. And, for the person who asked question about belief systems, yeah, well, it seems that some belief systems make it very difficult for people to accept scientific information, and we see that in the vaccine problems, that we have, that we've tried. I'm a family physician, and family physicians, pediatricians, doctors in general tried to get people to accept vaccines because we know that they will protect us against medical condition, many, sort of very serious diseases. But some people who, because of their belief systems, are not able to accept that. So I think there are different ways of dealing with that. School systems will often tell families that they can't put their children into school if they haven't been vaccinated because they're endangering the other children. Some places just, don't really do that. And so this is how, there can be different approaches to dealing with a problem. And the anxiety that goes along with it, that's something which I would love to spend more time talking about as we move forward. Okay, so a lot of people have said, oh no, it's really natural phenomena that have caused the warming, and it's sunspots, it's volcanoes, it's variations in the Earth's atmosphere, it's changes in atmospheric gases, it's all kinds of ideas have been put forward. But this graph shows you that if you look at the natural factors only, you would get a change in the temperature of the Earth that conforms to that green line. If you look at the natural and human factors together, you get a change that conforms to the purple line, and the actual observations are right in the middle of that purple line. So, the natural forces, natural factors, explanation just doesn't hold up. It doesn't explain the data. It doesn't explain the numbers.
Is it appropriate to ask a question?
Sure, yeah.
Related to this graph, would that have something to do with the environment in which humans in larger numbers live in more urban areas versus the animal world, or subhuman world, living more in rural environments where there's less intensity and focus of imbalances in the CO2?
Well, this is, so the natural, so if you look at volcanoes and the rotation of, the orbit of the Earth around the sun, and other things like that, sunspots and whatever, you would get really essentially no change in the temperature. That's the green line. Yeah. And but if you put the human factors, meaning the industrial or and
I see what you're trying
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So then that's really what, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so so we started with research, and we wanted to know, what do physicians know? Do they care about what they know, and what did they want? And I want to go on and talk about that, but we're another 20 minutes in the talk, and so I want to take another break and see if, you can clear your minds for a minute, think about, whether there's any questions or, things you want to talk about, and then we can move forward.
The human effects, does that include, 12,000 years ago we became agricultural, and we started domesticating and raising animals for meat, dairy, eggs, etc. Does that chart include animal agriculture's impact on the planet?
The one that we just saw, you mean?
Yeah, the previous chart.
That one there? Well,
human factors, it wouldn't be so many cattle and sheep and chickens.
yeah, well,
If it was 50,000 years ago.
yeah, well, this one only goes back to 1900.
Right,
So,
yeah.
so somebody did that, just to kind of show and put to rest, this theory that you often hear that, it's because of volcanoes or, whatever. It's like, yeah, it's changing. The Earth has always been changing. And yeah, it's true that the Earth has always been changing, but there's never been as rapid a change as what we've experienced. So that's a really important thing too. The Earth has always been changing. We had oceans in Montana at one time. We don't have oceans in Montana anymore, but there's never been as rapid a change as what's been happening over this last century. Most of the changes that have occurred in the Earth have occurred over millions of years.
Are the changes most severe in the most urbanized areas of the country or the world, rather than in the less populated areas?
Well, it
Can it be measured that way or not?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. But the changes that are more, there are certain differences. So there are definitely differences, and a good one, to talk about is the urban heat island. So, we talk about the fact that there's all this concrete in cities and asphalt, and all of that absorbs a lot of heat during the day.
Maybe try walking barefoot, you'll know.
Yeah. And then, it re-emits it. And also, because there are big skyscrapers and large buildings, the flow of air is blocked. And so it can be 15 degrees or more warmer in the center of the city than it is outside the city. And we used to live in Bethesda in an area that had a lot of trees. And I remember in the summer when the kids were on vacation, we would go downtown to walk on a summer evening or go downtown to walk during the day. And we lived under all these trees. There was a striking difference in temperature between what it was like, in our neighborhood where there were a lot of trees, and when we went downtown. And this was just Bethesda, which at the time didn't have that many big buildings. It has more big buildings now. But so there are those differences. And of course, geography makes a huge difference in whether you have torrential rains or not. There are all these, factors of airflow and weather, and so the geography has a big impact. And some things are urban versus rural, but other things have to do with, the coast tends to get certain kinds of storms. The nor'easter storms occur, across the Midwest and down, to the coasts. And geography plays a very big role in how different areas are experiencing climate change. Yeah.
Does the urban heat island effect, obviously it's more in New York or Washington, D.C., but it could also be fairly significant in, say, Charlottesville or Harrisonburg, Virginia.
Oh, yeah.
30,000.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I have a colleague who is the chief scientist at the Science Museum of Virginia in Richmond. And he has been doing all these studies all over Richmond, taking temperatures, and they go around driving cars with these little sensors and things, and and then they're making heat maps, and they're showing just these striking illustrations of the differences in temperature between the part of the city where the park is, that has a lot of trees, and the part of the city that has the big government buildings. It's it's really striking. And of course, trees not only create shade, trees also put moisture into the air. And that moisture that trees put into the air, that's called transpiration, the process of transpiration. The moisture that trees put into the air evaporates, and so it tends to cool the area right around the trees. So you've got the shade, you've got the evaporation. It's a very good reason to plant more trees. We have a lot of good reasons to plant more trees. And now, of course, there's also a lot of interesting data that's been accumulated about how much trees benefit people's psychological health, their mental health. That being, there's this folks who are writing prescriptions to go spend time in the park. So Park RX, it's called. And yeah.
Does the height of buildings make a big difference? 50s, 80-story buildings versus 5 to 10-story buildings, or is it more just how much surface area is covered either by buildings or sidewalks and streets?
Yeah,
So New York would have not much more of a heat island effect with its lower Manhattan high-rises versus DC, which doesn't have many high-rises?
Well, that's a very good question. I don't know if anybody, can exactly answer that. But, if you think about the blocking of airflow and the amount of cement and the amount of asphalt, all those are going to play a role. So, I think, these are really interesting to talk about.
Latitude.
Yeah.
It's different geography between the two cities.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to I would guess it's hard to isolate one factor when it may be multiple factors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, New York City is surrounded by water. DC really isn't. I mean, they've got Hudson River on one side, the East River on the other side. But yeah, it's complicated. I mean, and when it's when you're in New York in the summer, I was in the subway system just a couple of weeks ago, and it was hot. Just like here. Now we've had, I think we're more than 55 days over 90 degrees here in DC. We may be up to 60 days over 90 degrees in DC. So
Stations aren't air conditioned in New York either.
No, not air conditioned. Yeah, no. So yeah. All right. Well,
I think she has a question.
yeah. Sorry.
I have a question that touches on belief system and education. It seems that human beings are often impervious to the presentation of facts in terms of taking new information and changing their opinions. I just wondered if there's been much research on how to impact belief systems, how to present information in a way that it is more effective and bypasses some of the resistance that humans seem to have.
There's a very active, literature and discussion about those things, and so you've got some people studying this saying that a story will help to break through. If somebody has a frame that doesn't allow them to accept the facts, that a powerful story can break through. And so, you've got folks who are really supporting the idea of storytelling and using stories to help people understand. And others are, have done some research showing that you can immunize somebody against, these sort of, wrong ideas, bad ideas, that if you, give them information in a way that they can understand, which is geared to their, sort of cultural element and their level of education, that you can actually break through and help them to, overthrow a false belief system. There's other people talking about the power of relationships. There's a lot going on, and it's really important, and especially in the country right now, when we have so many people that seem to be so divided about, and their allegiance and their ideas about what's right, and from the point of view of, from my side, seem to be accepting a lot of lies. It's like, what the heck is going on here? And so I think it's a really important conversation. But I don't know that anybody really's got the one true, idea about it, about how to address it. Yeah. Actually, you folks may be interested, may not actually, but there is a piece called Breaking Hate, which features a guy by the name of Christopher Piccolini, who was a white supremacist sort of neo-Nazi, and finally broke out of that, and then decided that he wanted to try to help other young men break out of it. And so this piece, which was, I think it was a CNN special, and I happened to watch it a couple months ago with my dad, actually. I was visiting my dad, and Christopher Piccolini. And it focused in on 3 young men who had pretty much become, neo-Nazis, and how he kind of in his relationships with them, helped them to break out of that. And it was fascinating. It was one, actually, he ended up taking and introducing to Heather Heyer's mother. Heather Heyer was the young woman who was hit by the car in Charlottesville. Yeah, and so,
One of the 22 were injured, but she dies.
Yeah, she was one of, that's right. And so he did an intervention with this young man, and one of the pieces of it was that he ended up introducing her to Heather Heyer's mother, which was kind of amazing that her mother was willing to have this meeting. And anyway, it's not to get off the subject, but it's very fascinating, and that's an important question.
Yeah, it just seems to me that in the last year, it's been more and more clear that there's one kind of climate crisis after another. My family comes from Illinois, the Corn Belt, and they're noticing how the impact of weather is affecting their crops.
Yeah.
And that doesn't even speak to the flooding in Houston and all of, so I think it's hitting people more personally.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that because, again, I'm at the Center for Climate Change Communication, and so they've been doing those studies, climate change in the American mind, for 10 years. Most recently, the number of people that say climate change is personally important to me is up to 73%, which is actually a lot higher than it's been. 73%.
Is what?
Then people who say climate change is personally important to me. It's personally important to me.
What do you do with people who say, yeah, but I remember reading about the Dust Bowl, and I remember, even if they don't remember because they weren't alive at the time, but I've known people, when you start talking about it, coming back with their thinking, which has to do with past disaster moments, and some of them have happened in a relatively short period of time, in a decade rather than in 50 years. So,
yeah, so that's a very good question, and I've heard people say that. That was in, one area of the world, the part of the breadbasket of the United States. This is worldwide, and so these measurements are everywhere, all over the earth. And so, yeah, that's a difference right there. Okay, so what can clinicians potentially do? Well, as I was telling you, we did the surveys and we found out that doctors were seeing people in their offices that were impacted, and it was their own patients that were suffering, because of this. And so what roles do we have as clinicians? Well, we're healers, we're experts. People, look to us for information that they need to know. We also have a role as citizens, and we also can be advocates. And so we encourage those who, are part of our network to use all or any or all of those roles. And we like to say that we organize, empower, and amplify the voices of clinicians about climate change. And so what can you do as a healer? Well, you can help people to avoid danger. You can tell them how they can protect themselves. If they've got lung problems, they can be looking at the air quality index. If they, have kids or are pregnant, you can tell them to be paying, or elder people, paying special attention to the heat and the heat index. And you can tell them where they can get information to keep themselves safe, and you can provide an opportunity for them to talk about this. As an expert, you can increase your own knowledge. You can inform your colleagues, friends, and fellow citizens. You can engage in spreading information via the media by letters to the editor or op-ed pieces or blogs or interviews that you might do with media. And you can increase your expertise. You can go to our website, which is at ms2ch.org, where we've got reports, slide sets, journal articles. We put out a monthly newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter. And then we have announcements of webinars and trainings. And so there's a lot of ways to become more educated. And this, again, is the report that we put out. We'll be putting out another one within about 7 or 8 months. That will be kind of a follow-on to this one. But over on the right there, you can see that it says stay connected, sign up for our newsletter, and sign up and record activities. And so we ask advocates who would like to give a presentation or write a letter to the editor or visit a policymaker or write a letter to their representative to sign up and then let us know when they do. And we kind of keep track of what clinicians are doing all over the country. And so we've shown a steady increase, and that's very satisfying. And we've got a chart on our website, which I'll show you in just a minute, which shows how many people have logged in and told us what they were doing. These are a couple of the reports that are there. These are both from the Institute of Medicine, and they're basically summaries of the evidence about climate change. And I think both of them are very straightforward and easy to read. One was actually the Royal Society in Britain and the U.S. National Academy of Sciences together. And then there was this report that came out in 2016 called The Impacts of Climate Change on Human Health in the United States. And you can find that at a website called Health 2016, or you can also find it at our website. And so what can you do as a private citizen? Well, you can eat and move for wellness and sustainability, we like to say. You can focus on your meat intake and eat less of there. You can try to reduce your use of plastic, because not so much related to climate change, but related to climate change too, because plastic comes from fossil fuels and it's industrial processes that add greenhouse gases. You can travel sustainably whenever possible. You can try to use clean renewable energy. In a lot of places you can buy it from the grid. If you go to cleanchoiceenergy.com and you put in your zip code, it'll tell you whether you have a choice of buying energy that comes from wind or solar power or not. And if you do, you can decide that you're going to buy it from one of those vendors. And you'll be buying wind-generated energy rather than energy that comes from fossil fuels.
I believe Pepco does offer that.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I think it does. And in fact, we have Pepco as our provider, and we buy from an alternative energy provider. And that, is kind of through Pepco. It's all put together. But, you can think about getting an electric car. You can become informed, as a citizen and speak to other people. One of the things about climate change is that for a very long time, nobody was talking about it, because I think people felt so overwhelmed. But obviously, we're not going to solve anything if nobody talks about it. So, and there's plenty to talk about that's not, threatening. It could, this is what I'm thinking of doing. You talk to friends or family, whatever. And then what can you do as an advocate? Well, you can sign up as an advocate on our website, as I mentioned. You can vote based on the positions of candidates on climate solutions. You can participate in visits to policymakers at the local, state, or national level. A state level is of particular importance right now because not too much is happening at the federal level, as I'm sure everybody's noticed. You can write to policymakers. And then we have under the Take Action tab at our website, you can share a story. You have a personal story or a story as a provider, let us know the story. And we've got some public relations people we work with, and they're like looking at those stories. If they think a story has potential, they'll call and, or write and try to talk to you about it and see if we can turn it into something that, may be able to be of interest to the press. They help us with things like that.
Well, no, hold up, wait, go back a minute.
ms2ch.org, take action. Okay, and so this shows you that Take Action tab, and you can see in the blue box there, it says Become an Advocate for Climate and Health, and then underneath that it says Story Bank, Share a Patient Story, and so that's where you can put in any stories that you might want to share. So again, we organize, empower, and amplify, so we organize at the national level because we've got this consortium. We support some state-based affiliates. There's one in Virginia, one in Ohio, one in Wisconsin, one down in Florida, a variety of different states. And then we've also got this individual advocates program. And so this shows some of the states. We have added some states since this map was put together. And this is an example of the pie graph that we have on the website. This is an old one, so we have many, many more activities than this. But when you put in activities, you actually see the numbers. If you refresh your screen, you could see the numbers in that pie graph increase, so it's very satisfying. You do something, you put in the number, you put in your activity, and you see the number go up. And I mentioned before that the allergists had this meeting focused on climate change, so this is their a presentation about that meeting, and same thing for the Climate Psychiatry Alliance. They had a position paper, they put out a policy, they created a web page, they had 13 scientific sessions, and then they also divested from fossil fuels. And our big open annual meeting a couple of years ago, we had almost 300 people, and so we're having one again this year, May 18th and 19th, and we'll be sending out a notice about that. I mentioned on the topic of Amplify, we have a public relations firm, and they've helped us get tremendous news coverage. It's really been very gratifying. And then on June 24th, we put out something called that was referred to as the Call to Action on Climate, Health, and Equity, a Policy Agenda. And there are now 125 organizations, schools, academic science centers, and health systems with over 500 hospitals that have all agreed to support this policy action agenda. And we refer to climate change as a public health emergency. It's a public health emergency in our view at this point. And there's a 10-part policy agenda that goes along with that. And most of the policy points on there are also beneficial for health. So, not only are they address climate change, they're also good for health. So if we improve the transportation system, we have less gunk in the air, and that's good for our health, and things like that. So, we feel strongly that we need to be thinking about equity as we address climate change, because everybody's at risk, but people who are more vulnerable are more likely to be affected sooner and more severely, and so we really need to be thinking about that and how to, make sure that people are protected. And so, we would like to create the greatest potential for rapid adoption of a policy action agenda in communities and states ongoing and nationally in 2020. And so we really are trying to get the word out there. Transportation, how we make our energy, how we do our agriculture, what we eat, all of these things, play a part in the solutions to climate change. And so the agenda, yes, we support carbon pricing, that can play a significant role, but there's a lot of other things also that can all contribute to addressing climate change. And our policy action agenda, which actually, before you put that away, you may want to hear where it is. It's at climatehealthaction.org. climatehealthaction.org is where the policy agenda can be found. climatehealthaction.org, and it has the full policy agenda. And you can see when you look at it, that there's a lot of different things you can work on based on what you see in your area and what you're interested in. Okay, so the other thing is that the health system really should be cleaning up its own act. Hospitals are very energy intensive. They use too much energy, and they could be using a lot less. They could be a lot less wasteful. They could be using a lot less energy. Their food could be healthier. There's a lot that hospitals can be doing. And so there's a lot of folks who are working on that specifically. Okay, and so again, you know, when the public is asked, they see health as the single most important reason to care about climate change, and very close behind that is stewardship of the earth for our children and grandchildren. And much of the public doesn't yet see climate change as a health issue, but we're in a position to let them know that it is a health issue, and to talk about, you know, what we've seen and what our colleagues have seen and what we know from hearing from our colleagues. And so that's powerful. And we're trusted messengers. People don't think that we're out to, you know, just kind of make profits. They think that we're there to help them, and health professionals generally are. And so, you know, so the trust element is very important. And I guess that's what I have to say, and I'm happy to spend some time taking some questions, or maybe you want to get up and stretch for a minute before you ask a question. Yeah.
I'm curious, you're collecting information from doctors about, are they aware of a lot of things that are going on that they see in their practice? Are you also going to be collecting information on what they do with that information to feed back to patients? For instance, one of the things that sort of hit me one day when I went to the doctor and I complained about something, well, you're aging. And I'm thinking, well, thank you, that's all I needed to know. But, you know, and I'm thinking about this, though. If a doctor says to a patient, young or old, or anywhere in between, you know, climate is shifting and we're seeing more of this now. You know, put it where the point is. And let them know that this is a concern, and they're now part of that concern. If they just talk about the symptom and what one can do about it, they're not making the connection necessarily. And that's a way, it seems to me, if one can do that more regularly, that we would shift some of those in-between people that are not quite sure about how this affects me as climate change. You might get some more people moving to a more aggressive stance on it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And there's a lot of physicians who are saying that they are doing, you know, some physicians who are saying that they are doing that now, and some who are urging their colleagues to do the same. Mm-hmm. And so we're also, you know, trying to get more materials that doctors can use to hand to patients, you know, that help them to have that conversation. But yeah, you know, how can you take care of an allergy patient without saying, you know, by the way, yeah, you know, the climate's changing, and the allergy season is longer. It's probably going to continue to get longer, and it's probably going to be more severe. You may have to start your medicines earlier and take them longer and take more of them, and this is, you know, what is happening. And the same thing with air quality for people who are likely to be sensitive to changes in air quality. So yeah, there's a lot going on. And actually there's some videos on our website there's a patient education tab, and there's some videos that come out of the University of Wisconsin that do some of that, and there's also some handouts that, you know, physicians, clinicians can use in taking care of patients, and you know, share that information with them. But when we first started, you know, some said, no, I'm too busy, you know, I can't add anything else to my conversation. You know, a lot of the pediatricians feel really strongly you have to add something else to your conversation. Otherwise, how are you going to tell the parents to, you know, to take proper care of their children? If you can't say to them, look, you know, it's hotter now in the summer. It's not the way you remember summer when you were a kid. It's a different thing. And you really, this is climate change. You really have to make sure that your children are protected, you know, that kind of thing. So I think that's a really strong point. And that is one of the things that, you know, ends up getting talked about.
Is the heart problems that kill athletic young people, is that an increase over the past, and does that have to do with climate change, or other variables?
Yeah, the number of kids playing sports who have gone to emergency rooms.
Many die.
Yeah, has increased, and so there is some really good data about that. The American Academy of Pediatrics has that data, and yeah, and kids who play sports are at greater risk, and football players are even at the greatest risk. And often when we hear those stories, it's often about a football player. So yeah, so it's very
Those
tragic.
eating an omnivore diet by far are at the greatest risk. 99% of heart disease is diet related. Genetics is a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage. Watch the movie Game Changers, just came out.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I just wondered, I have never thought of physicians as socially active in general. Do you think this is, I don't know if the word radicalizing, but
Well, that's an
organizing physicians to be involved in the broader world in a broader way, or not particularly?
Well, interestingly, in those surveys that we did, we asked, whether first of all, what were they seeing? It turns out they were seeing quite a bit. And did they think that they wanted to be involved in some way? And about 60, almost 70% of the surveys that we did, and this wasn't all specialties, so I'm sure there's some specialties that are less likely to be involved, but said that they felt that doctors had a responsibility to let the public know. And and then a similar number said they felt doctors had a responsibility to let their patients know. So in other words, if you realize something, if you're, taking care of others, they felt that there was a responsibility to let them know. And then, about 3/4 said they thought that all should be educated about this. They thought it was a vital part of medical education. And they felt, that this really surprised me. A colleague encouraged me to put this on the survey, and I wouldn't have otherwise. But about 3/4 said they felt that physicians should be taking a leading role in making their own workplaces environmentally sustainable. So that, goes back to the hospitals and how wasteful they are, and that they use too much energy, and they, turn over, they have huge amounts of waste, and, so on and so forth. And for a while, they were still using mercury thermometers, which was an issue, and then they got the mercury out of it. Anyway, there's all these things that have to do with, do no harm that, also seem to be a strong motivator.
On that line, I think it'd be really interesting to do a survey of those who thought that they should do, to find out if they are doing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that,
I'm in a totally different field, and I think there are a lot of people who say something, but they don't really follow it themselves.
Yeah, you mean they give it lip service and then,
Because it's too hard. It means change, and change is very hard for people, I think. Maybe not for a few, but for the majority, I think keep doing what's habitual is much easier than thinking about doing something else. And
well, that's a good argument for policy change, changing the way we produce energy, changing the way, the transportation that's available, that we have more public transportation so people feel more, feel more comfortable taking it and can take it to get where they need to go. Yeah, walk, ride bicycle, whatever. But so, the policy changes can, really, they save people from having to make individual life activity changes just by virtue of changing the environment. So, I think that's more powerful. It's hard. It's also hard to do. It's all hard. The policy change is hard. The individual changes are hard. We have a generation coming along that greatly needs to have this done, and so. I think everybody is hoping that as opinion shifts, we see it shifting before our eyes. We've seen it over the last 10 years, and it's continuing to shift. That as opinion shifts, and as there's more evidence of how serious this is, that people, that the policy changes will come. So we'll see.
apathy hits this country more than anything else.
Apathy thing. Well, yeah. I mean. I don't feel, I I mean, I obviously I'm working with a lot of people who are pretty activist in their, in their bent at this point. So I'm not seeing it quite that way, but I see what you're talking about is out there. There's no question about it.
The universe isn't typical of the population as a whole, I would guess.
Yeah, well, but you also see big changes depending upon where people live. So, if you're in Maryland, it's a matter of law at this point that it's going to, clean energy. And California, as a matter of law, is going to a clean energy future. And they're going to a car future that's going to give us much cleaner and more fuel-efficient cars. And, there's these 20 states that, are forging ahead, despite what the president has tried to do with the Paris Agreement. So it's a mixed reality out there.
Yeah, you're not the only executive director relative to climate that doesn't seem to know these things, but 42% of the world's surface land area is devoted to animal agriculture to feed us. Most of that not pasture for cows, but soybean, corn, etc., to feed to fish or cows or whatever. 70% of Americans die of nutritional ignorance. Those that go accept their biology because they know we're an herbivore species and eat that way, and babies to 100-year-olds could do this, instantly cut their impact on the planet to 1/7 of what it is for omnivores.
Yeah, well, you know what, I am remiss in that I didn't talk about, decreasing meat intake, and I agree with that. I totally agree with that. I think, we're not going to get to zero meat intake, right away, but I think, meat, 65 raising cattle is responsible for 65% of the agriculture, of the impact of agriculture on climate change.
Impacts the planet
Absolutely.
more than all forms of motorized transportation combined worldwide. Yeah. The side effects are fantastic. You add a decade to your life expectancy, you're happier and healthier for much longer, you're more likely to die relatively peacefully. We're a mortal species, or I wouldn't be a life insurance agent. The 16 leading causes of death are also the 16 leading causes of disability, and only 15 of them, not all 16, accidents count.
And also the water, the water use of
diet.
The water use of raising
Animal
cattle
protein,
is
because it's acidic,
very disproportionate and very
all
wasteful.
protein comes from plants. Animal protein, because it's acidic, damages our body in lots of ways. So kidney stones, doubling the chance of kidney stones is one minor way. Cancer is one major way. If we accepted our biology, the U.S. would save, just in the financial cost, $5 trillion US, not counting the impact on the climate being better, not counting, dad feels fine one day, 3 days later he's dead of a heart attack, now I'm an orphan. $5 trillion per decade just on heart disease.
Do you give talks about this? Because if you don't, you should.
Another night. We will have this discussion.
Yeah, you should give talks on this. Clearly, you are very knowledgeable and are very, very interested in it, and it's important. I don't minimize it. Yeah.
Eggs are worse than cigarettes. The USDA promotes egg product consumption, except you can't say eggs are healthy, nutritious, or safe in that promotion, because it would violate truth in advertising laws. And the condition, and I'm also, you save 300 animal lives a year, as well. The eggs-related conditions that make the Holocaust Museum look like palatial human living conditions.
Well, we need to ask if anybody else has a question.
What?
We need to ask if anybody else has a question of our esteemed speaker.
Okay.
And I think this woman has a question.
Just wondered if there are any noticeable differences in the reaction of physicians testifying versus scientists versus private citizens.
You mean testifying like at EPA rollbacks or?
Just anywhere that needs to hear this message at a policy level.
So yeah, I mean that's really what we're about. It's trying to make it easier for physicians to weigh in, knowing what we now know about the fact that physicians are aware and concerned and feel that they have a duty to speak out, we have been trying to make it easier for them to go ahead and do that, provide the materials, the talking points, the templates for letters, make sure that the announcements about the dates of the hearings get out. So for instance, there's a methane rollback that's been proposed just recently by the EPA, and there's a hearing in Dallas on October 17th. And so we just put out a notice today asking for anybody who could potentially go to the Dallas, Texas hearing and to testify against the methane rollback. So, you know, we're really trying to do that. And yes, we have a lot who are participating. And so over the last several years, you know, we have about 1,000 who have now gone into our log and let us know what they're doing. There's 1,000 events, you know, that we've heard about, either an article written or a presentation given or a letter written to a policymaker or a hearing, you know, testimony, that kind of thing. So there's about 1,000 activities that we have recorded. So that's since, let's see, it's 2 years actually. And we know that that does not include, you know, there's many that are not included there, so we know it's many more, but we're trying to make it as easy as possible for everybody, you know, to get involved, as many people who are interested to get involved, to speak up and, you know, and to be part of that process of educating others and trying to move the needle, trying to, you know, let everybody know what policy changes we need. And including, you know, differences in how we grow food and what kind of food we eat. So, yeah, I mean, absolutely.
So I guess the question had to do with, is there a difference because of the position of respect that physicians have in the country?
Has it made a difference already, you're asking? Well, you know, it's hard to know whether it has or it hasn't. You know, I think, look, physicians alone are not asking for these changes, and so when people are organized, when there's a group organized at a state level, for instance, you know, we try to get them together to meet and talk to each other. But then in order to be effective, you know, they really have to be working in coalition with the environmental groups and the environmental justice groups and, you know, and the other organizations within the state who are working for change. So physicians can come forward and give a certain kind of testimony and certain kind of information. And as you said, you know, there's a lot of respect and, you know, stature and so forth, which helps. But it's not like, you know, they alone are going to make the difference by any means. It really has to be a coalition. And so, you know, people often come together, you know, sort of as a part of their own sort of, you know, cohort, because they're comfortable with that cohort. I mean, we tend, you know, to get into our own groups very often for comfort and, you know, and to be reinforced and so forth. But in any case, so Virginia is a great example. We have about 300 doctors there who have been very involved with the, you know, in Richmond with the General Assembly there and trying to influence the legislators. And, you know, they came like this close to getting Virginia to join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which Maryland is in, and all 9 states, you know, north of Virginia along the East Coast are part of that RGGI. But one vote kept Virginia from joining that. So, you know, there was still one holdout, so they couldn't get a majority. But then the governor, Northam, decided that he was going to try to get Virginia into the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative anyway. And then the legislature came back and said they were going to withhold funds. And so any expenditure that had to be made was going to have to come out of other places in the budget. And, you know, there's a raging battle going on in Virginia. And so we're based in Virginia, in George Mason. You know, it's not over yet by any means. But Northam has just announced that, you know, he's going to be moving to greatly increase clean energy and decrease fossil fuel energy.
Do you think that this organization is influencing the curriculum that's in med schools to be talking about these kinds of issues?
So we have like a sister organization, a brother organization called the Global Consortium on Climate and Health Education, and the Global Consortium on Climate and Health Education. And so they are some of the same folks who are in our group, also are in their group, but they're the people who work in the medical schools and the nursing schools. And yeah, they have actually now gotten the LCME, which is the licensing board, to say that they would put some questions about climate change on the licensing exam. So yeah, they're really they're breaking through there. They're finally breaking through, yeah. Yeah.
Raises another question. Medicine it has been and continues to be in such specialty areas, in so many ways, so that I've had my challenges trying to see a doctor versus 5, so that you're not treating just one aspect of the physiology, but you're treating the whole body. And it's very hard to find people that will even talk that way because they're so specialized. So I'm wondering how much those physicians who are in real specialties, not family practice, not pediatricians, because they see a whole group of people, versus orthopedics.
Yeah, that's a very good question. We do not have the American College of Surgeons as a member of our organization right now. We've tried to get them to join, but I got a call, first an email and then had a telephone conversation with a surgeon from Kentucky who invented a plant-based nutrient system for people who have terminal and serious illnesses because they were not able to take the nutritional sources that were otherwise available. And so he essentially, developed this plant-based nutritional supplement and has been selling it, and it's done very well. And in any case, that's part of his life, but he is extremely worried about climate change. And he's a successful businessman as well as a successful surgeon. And so he came up with this idea that what we really need is like a logo, like a Nike swoosh, just do it. And the logo, and he did a lot of breast cancer surgery, and he realized that the pink ribbon became, sort of right at the center of being concerned about breast cancer. And so he came up with this idea that there should be a Y symbol, and it would be why in the world. It would be a Y on top of a globe, and it would be like, why in the world, why wouldn't we, or why in the world would we allow this to happen to the earth, would be the message. So, and he really wants to develop that. And so I thought it was intriguing, but, I can't really take the time to do that right now. So we talked about, his idea and how he might be able to follow up on it. But anyway, so he's a committed surgeon who is so concerned about climate change, and he wrote a letter to the American College of Surgery asking them to please join the consortium, which I hope that they do.
Family practitioner question. I don't think I'm going to be a grandfather because of climate change. My son and daughter-in-law don't want to have kids to live through the next 100 years. And as a family practitioner, if you know, how many others that are of childbearing age are deciding, as much as we like to have kids, we don't want to put kids through the next 50, 80, 100 years. How much is that a factor with the younger generation deciding not to have children at all?
That's a really good question. There was a piece recently in the Washington Post about that, that phenomena. And I have heard young people say they're thinking about not having children because of this. And I've heard, others say that, they have friends who won't because of this.
Now they could adopt. It would be kind of a win-win in both respects. But and I've heard that 2/3 of climate change is in the oceans. I've heard from some oceanography society that not what's told, but something that prestigious, that 93% of climate change is in the oceans. Which is it, if you know?
I think, I'm not sure what they mean by that, but for a long time there was a debate about whether the ocean would pick up all of the excess carbon dioxide that was going into the atmosphere, so it would essentially protect the planet from getting warmer. And that's the reason that in 1958 they started to measure carbon dioxide at one place on the Earth every year at the same time. And as it turned out, those who thought that the oceans would protect the Earth were wrong, because the temperature has been rising.
And is that at the top of the mountain or at sea level?
It's at the top of the mountain. That's where they measure it.
My turn.
Are you have more questions? Okay.
I do have no more questions, but I'll ask them another day. Thank you very much.
It's a complex subject, so happy to start at this off.
It was going to be full of questions. You were wrong. The next meeting will be in January 23rd. There will not be a December meeting this year, and we have the symposium in November. In January, we have Peggy Chan, who's here